Hello, everybody. Welcome into the Apples and Genos Fantasy Hockey Podcast. My name is Nate Groot Niblink. I'm the creator of Apples and Genos, originator of the Zero G Draft Strategy, and in this podcast, I'm going to go over the most puzzling players league-wide as submitted by the Apples and Genos Discord server. Let's get it. What's up, everybody? Nate here, ready to bring you some more puzzling players. I'm excited to see everybody in the chat. Antonio's in here. Lost Ones is in here. Calling me the GOAT. What's up with that? Don't think I've done enough to deserve that kind of praise, but hey, we'll take it. We'll take it. Trying to accept some compliments, Trying to make some changes in that regard. It's been quite the day. Lots of hockey today. A little bit odd for a Monday. Usually Mondays are a quiet night, but we're getting lots of hockey today, which is awesome. Had scores rolling in all day long, which is fun to see. I've got Ross Colton scoring a power play 1 goal. We have Valerie Nichushkin stepping away, unfortunately, going into the player assistance program. And so we'll have to watch and see what comes of that. Obviously, Colton getting on the power play as a result, but also you have Arturi Lehkonen looming there. So what's going to happen there? Lots to come still in Avalanche land for sure. Looks like Makar got a goal as well, so he's helping me out. I had a stellar week last week in all my I won all 4 of my leagues last week, all 4 of my matchups, so I'm feeling good. I'm feeling like I know what I'm doing this week. Next week, who knows? Maybe I'll have lost all 4 and I'll come into this feeling like I don't know what I'm doing. But I'm feeling good today. Hopefully you are too. Antonio's going to kick us off with a question here. Hey, so what do you think of Luke Hughes? 12-team points league, middle of the standings, even with the time on ice of over 20 minutes. He's really not producing. Drop, I have Dahlin, Makar, Morrissey. So let's throw Luke Hughes in here, see how he's been doing of late. Yeah, just the 1 assist in the last 5 games here, averaging nearly 23 minutes a night over the last 5 games, so that's pretty solid. Underlying numbers are not looking so hot. 152nd in shots per 60, 58th in individual scoring chances 4 per 60, 109 in Corsi 4 per 60, 74 in scoring chances 4 per 60. On the season now, pacing for 14 goals, 46 points. The on-ice stats still look good for Hughes. Of course, they're being buoyed by being on the New Jersey power play, but without his brother in town, that's definitely, held the power play down. And then Myers left, and suddenly the Devils are not quite as scary as they once were. So it makes sense that Hughes is not performing quite as well as he once was. And I've said this a million times, and I'm going to keep saying it probably every single year that I do this podcast, but rookies are pretty unpredictable in this way. They'll go through ups and downs, and it's pretty hard to say whether a downtrend is, a sign of the fact that they're just like getting overwhelmed in their first year in the league, and we should expect that downtrend to continue for the rest of the year, or sometimes it's just peaks and valleys in a rookie season for these guys. I don't know why this is the one that I think of, but Drake Batherson in his rookie year, he had a really good stretch, and I got really excited about him. He had really great underlying numbers for like a solid run. I think it was like 10 or 12 games. He had really good underlying stats. I was getting really excited about Drake Batherson, and then he just went cold, completely cold again for like 20 games. And I was like, oh man, I hate Drake Batherson. And then the end of the season, he kind of came back and he brought all those numbers back. And so I think more than anything, it's just that rookies are finding their way in the league. And by virtue of that, they're going to be a little bit more unpredictable than the rest of these guys. I do think you can drop Hughes in a lot of spots. Don't think you have to feel like you have to hang on. I mean, even if you go at the season long stats at this point, like a 46-point pace is like okay. But yeah, he's not shooting a ton. He's not doing a lot of the other things, hitting, blocking that we get points for in most leagues. So I'm okay with dropping Luke Hughes. It's always going to be situation dependent, obviously, but I'm okay with dropping Luke Hughes if he is the bottom of your lineup. Jackson's in here. What's up, boys? Zero G all day, every day. You got the right energy. That's the energy we need in this chat right now for sure. Well, let's go ahead and get into it. Let's talk about some of these puzzling players as submitted by the Apples and Jones Discord server. It was a little bit light this week. I got really busy at work. Usually I do it around lunchtime, like noon or 1 o'clock, somewhere in there. But today at work, I was just totally slammed, and so I didn't get it out till like 3:30. So that probably didn't help things. I probably missed some people because of that. But regardless, we got some names in here that we're going to dive into, and then we also had a question in the chat asking about some of the players that I find the most puzzling and what puzzles me about players. So I thought that was kind of interesting and kind of can lead me into a bit of a broader discussion. So if we got some time, we'll get into that as well. But let's kick it off with Matt Boldy here. I did see that Boldy did find an assist in the game here today against the Islanders. So this will update and it'll look pretty solid even after this game here that's going on right now as I'm recording against the Islanders. But Boldy, before this game, 4 goals, 6 points in his last 5 games, averaging over 20 minutes a night, 60th in shots per 60, 23rd in individual scoring chances for per 60, 89th in Corsi for per 60, 119th in scoring chances for per 60. So Boldy is a guy that I've been on all year long. He was a subject to one of my hot takes. I said he would score 100 points this year. Obviously, that one's not gonna come to fruition this year unless something totally insane happens for the rest of the season. But I do think that Boldy is an extremely talented player, and he does have 100-point upside in his future. Right now, in this game that's going on against the Islanders, he's playing on what I guess you would call the second line with Joel Eriksson Ek and Marcus Johansson, while Rossi is centering Kaprizov and Zuccarello. And that's not ideal for Boldy, but obviously he's still on the top power play. He's going to be a fixture there, and he's going to get a lot of minutes one way or another. On the season, pacing for 35 goals, 61 points, just over 18 minutes average time on ice. But you see the underlying numbers have been really strong there all year long. 67% IPP, 15.6% shooting percentage, and 9.4% on ice shooting percentage on the season. I do think that he's got some room to grow in the on ice shooting percentage in particular to get back up to close to, if not right at, a point per game pace rest of season. So I do think that Boldy does have some strong upside from this 61 point pace that he's currently on, and especially the other route that can really help him get there is if he does continue to see this kind of 20 minutes average time on ice moving forward. It goes without saying, right? Any player who's getting more time on ice, they're on the ice more often, they're getting more chances, and that's one path to success. So we'll have to monitor that because it did seem to be a little bit of a case where while Kaprizov was out, they were leaning on Boldy a lot more, and then Kaprizov came back and Boldy only skated 16:04. Now, that was the back end of a back-to-back. They had played Philly the day before, and he had skated 22 minutes and 25 seconds in that game. Excuse me. And so you wonder if they were just like, this is a 6-0 game. We're getting whitewashed by the Coyotes. Maybe we won't play the absolute heck out of Boldy in this one. So we'll see. They're into the third period now, and he's skated 14 minutes so far. So he's on pace for, what would that work out to be? Around 18 minutes, maybe, somewhere in that range. But they're up 3-0 again pretty comfortably at this point. So, yeah. All things told, I want to keep an eye on that deployment, keep an eye on that average time on ice number, and see if he can continue to sustain that. If he can, then there's definitely even more upside. But I do think that Boldy has point per game upside from this point out. This last little stretch is really just more of him getting some of that positive variance that I think he's been missing so far. Next up here, we've got Brandon Montour. Montour, 2 assists in his last 5 games. I believe he did catch an assist in the game today as well. I believe that's captured, though, in the stats that I have here already. So Montour has obviously been a player that's come up a lot of the time in here. He did have 4 shots in the game today, skated 24-31, ton of power play time. Pretty much exactly what we expect from Montour. 24th in shots per 60, 10th in individual shot attempts per 60, 10th in on-ice Corsi for per 60, and 7th in on-ice scoring chances for per 60. All terrific numbers for Brandon Montour. On the season, he has a 23% IPP. That is incredibly bad. That's like Mark Giordano on the Leafs as a 40-year-old levels of bad. And I definitely don't think that's going to sustain. This is a guy who's dangerous. You can see his season-long ranks are just crazy high across the league. 23% IPP, 1.6% shooting percentage, just a 10% on ice shooting percentage, despite how hot Florida's been of late. I keep saying it is going to happen. It's not happened for a long time, but we kind of went through the same thing with Matt Tkachuk on the same team here, where like it's gonna happen, it's gonna happen, it's gonna happen, it's gonna happen. Felt like it was never gonna happen, felt like it was never gonna happen, and then finally it did happen. Montour's only played 27 games on the season, so realistically, he's kind of on that Tkachuk trajectory where for the first 27 games, it felt like it should be happening, but it wasn't happening, and then it really started to click. So I do believe that Montour is on his way to making a big outburst, I guess, the rest of the season, and we should reap the benefits of that if we're able to acquire him or pick him up if somebody's dropping him, depending on how shallow your league is. Maybe somebody's doing that in your league, but I would be all over Montour if there's any way I could be acquiring him. Let's get back into the chat. Jackson asks, is Ehlers a hold once Connor comes back, or is it too hard to tell right now till we see his deployment/line combinations? Yeah, so Ehlers was the next player up to talk about. He's got 3 goals, 5 points in his last 5 games, 5th in shots per 60, 1st in individual shot attempts per 60, 8th in on-ice Corsi 4 per 60, 35th in scoring chances 4 per 60. It's been really good for Ehlers the last little bit. I guess it is hard to say. There's no two ways about it. I wish that there was an easy way for me to make some sort of major proclamation here about exactly what's going to happen once Connor is back. There's no easy way to say that for certain. I will say that as of right now, Ehlers skating on average over 16, 15 on the season, 29 goals, 64-point pace, 77% IPP, 11.8% shooting percentage, 10.2% on ice shooting percentage. That I feel is kind of like a baseline for Ehlers, no matter what else happens rest of season. And then if he is able to stick on the top power play, then you have upside from that point. So that's where I'd be at with Ehlers. Is I feel like now he's like shown himself enough, I guess, this year to cement this kind of level of deployment and usage where he should see this 16 minutes a night. And at that level, I'm comfortable with this like 29 goal, 64-point pace that he's on. If he gets beyond this and gets top line, top power play for the rest of the season, which I do think is possible, maybe even probable, then yeah, he's got more upside beyond that. Because he has so much upside, I don't really know that I'd be looking to get off him unless somebody else in your league is willing to pay like top dollar, like pay like he's a point per game player for sure the rest of the season. Then, sure, I'll trade the player and I'll just take something that's a little bit more assured for the rest of the season. If that's your case in your league and you can get that, then by all means go out and get it just to, kind of lock in that value, I guess you could call it. But overall, I think I'm comfortable with Ehlers. Even if he does get knocked down a peg by the return of Connors, I think that he should be pretty solid for the rest of the season with still all that upside if he does manage to hang on to line 1, power play 1, or get back up there through another injury or whatever the case may be. All right, Simon P says, is Cam York an easy drop, and why does Caulfield suck? Cam York, yes, easy drop in my opinion. They've tried everybody else other than Cam York this season. They've tried Sanheim, they've tried Zamula, they brought in Jamie Drysdale. Yeah, I think you can drop Cam York, no question about it in my mind. Cole Caulfield, I believe he's got a point here today in the game against Colorado. He's got a power play assist. He's got, prior to this game, 1 goal, 1 assist, 2 points in his last 5 games, skating 20 minutes a night, 13th in shots per 60 during this stretch, 63rd in individual scoring chances, 4 per 60. On-ice numbers are not good, as you might expect, 150th in Corsi, 4 per 60, 153rd in scoring chances, 4 per 60. On the season, pacing for 23 goals, 56 points. You kind of see very similar numbers in his season-long stats here. I will say The 63% IPP sounds about right. The 7.8% shooting percentage is astronomically low for a player of Cole Caulfield's talents, in my mind. Caulfield, in his first few stints here in the league, has shown the ability to be a much more high efficiency shooter. So I don't believe that he's going to shoot 7.8% for the rest of the season. Last season, he shot 16.5%. The season before that, he shot 12.2%. So he should, at minimum, I would expect get back up to like that 12.2% range with probably upside for more. And that is borne out by the individual scoring chances that he does generate, that he should be like a relatively good shooting percentage player, relatively efficient shooter. So somewhere in the 13% range is where I'd probably estimate Caulfield should be the rest of the season. If he shoots at 13% and everything else kind of stays the same, then I mean, yeah, what are you talking about? You're going from just under 8% up to 13%. You're talking about, yeah, probably an extra like 13 goals. He'd be on like a 36 goal pace instead of a 23 goal pace if that were to be the case. And then he'd be up to like a 69 point pace, which would be pretty nice. And I think everybody would be super happy with Caulfield at that point. So I think he's just pretty snake bitten at this point. It is hard to discount the fact that Montreal sucks, and his teammates are not doing him a lot of favors in a lot of cases. Slavkovsky, I mentioned, I don't think having him on that line is doing him any favors. Not that the Canadians have a ton of other talent that they could be using up there that would really help, but you got to feel like there could be somebody else that could be helping Caulfield's offensive numbers at least a little bit more. So that's my take on Caulfield at the moment. Toronto Dave's in here. Good to see you, buddy. Saying hashtag 0G. Josh asking who comes back tomorrow or Wednesday? Patrick Kane, Arturi Lehkonen, or Alexander Barkov? Yeah, so all these guys have kind of. It seems like they're on the cusp of returning. Kane obviously just got knocked out of the game on Sunday. Barkov got held out of the latter part of the game today. Lehkonen is working his way back from a longer-term neck injury. Your guess is honestly as good as mine at this point. Unless I've missed something, I haven't seen any conclusive wording on any of these players at this point. Barkov, I will say, it did sound a little bit more precautionary, just the way that they were talking. So I guess if I had to choose one of these three, I would say Barkov, but really I don't know. We're going to have to just be on the news and be ready to jump whenever we hear. Antonio asks, also, Nate, what do you think of Zacha? I think he's a drop with the way it's going for him right now. I'm inclined to agree. I did say that Zacha could be a drop, especially with the Bruins' schedule this week not being the greatest. They've played today, but now they don't play again till Thursday and Saturday, which are both heavy nights, so it's not a great situation. He's got 2 points in his last 4 games here, which again is nothing to write home about, despite the fact that he's had some pretty good deployment. Now he's been pushed down the lineup. It's Charlie Coyle who's taken the spot that he did previously have, centering Marchand and Pastrnak on the top line. He's been knocked off the top power play as well. I think Zacha is pretty clearly a drop at this point. Ironically, his underlying metrics have started to come up now that he's been demoted down the lineup, so go figure. But yeah, really the only reason to get excited about Zacha ever in my mind was exposure to Pastrnak or Brad Marchand. So yeah, I think you can safely drop Pavel Zacha. All right, let's get back into this. John Carlson, he's been an absolute fixture in puzzling players all season long. Finally, some good stuff to talk about. He's got a goal, 4 points in his last 5 games here. Still skating his customary 25.5 minutes a night. 79th in shots per 60, 69th in individual scoring chances 4 per 60, which is nice and not nice at the same time. 121st in Corsi 4 per 60, 76th in scoring chances 4 per 60. Obviously, Ovechkin being out for the last couple of games, that's not going to help a guy like Carlson, who typically generates a lot on the power play. On the season now, Carlson pacing for 6 goals, 48 points. The 3.4% shooting percentage should come up. The 8% on ice shooting percentage is atrociously low for a guy of his talent, so I do think that comes up. But then the 57% IPP is actually pretty high. He's been factoring in on a lot of goals that are scored when he is on the ice. I guess If I had to put a point pace on it, probably like a 55 point pace is where I'd have Carlson rest of season. He should be able to find some more goals for himself here moving forward, and that should bump up his overall numbers a little bit. 55 point pace is where I'll call it rest of season. Definitely it's come down from where I had him projected. Washington just hasn't been able to score the way that I thought they still should be able to. Maybe Pacioretty really starts to come into his own as he continues to work back from his Achilles injury, and that really aids them. And Ovechkin comes back and is just as good as he was in previous years. Maybe there's a scenario in where this all works out and Carlson does get back to higher heights. But at this point, yeah, I'm calling it somewhere around a 55 point pace is my expectation rest of season for John Carlson. Joel Eriksson Ek was another request. He's got 3 assists in his last 5 games here. I'm going to double check. I believe he got a couple points in this game against the Islanders. That's still ongoing as we're talking here. He's got the 1 goal. Okay, he's got 1 goal on the power play from Kaprizov and Zuccarello in this game. So we'll add that to his totals here just mentally, but 20 minutes on average, kind of doing what he's always done. The shots are a little bit down from where they have been typically for Eriksson Ek, who's been a big-time shooter through most of the last couple of seasons. 122nd in shots per 60 in the last stretch, 272nd in individual scoring chances 4 per 60, 99th in Corsi 4 per 60, 144th in scoring chances 4 per 60. On the season now, pacing for 29 goals, 55 points. 53% IPP, 9.4% shooting percentage, 10.1% on ice shooting percentage. I feel like, I think I talked about this not that long ago where I kind of said I feel like Joel Eriksson Ek is kind of good enough to get stats when he's playing with really good players, and then when a guy like Kaprizov goes down, that hurts Joel Eriksson Ek more than it hurts a lot of other players. Realistically, looking at what Joel Eriksson Ek has done the last few years, I don't know that you can really expect him to shoot much more than this 9.4%. He's had the one season where he shot close to 16%. For the most part, like he's only ever had one other season that's been over 10% in his career. So, yeah, last year he had 9.3% shooting percentage. So it wouldn't be shocking if he was shooting around this once again. His underlying metrics, he's shooting a little bit more this year. He's getting a little bit more ice time, so all that's good. The on-ice stats are good. The on-ice shooting percentage is down this year. Maybe that does come back up and you get a little bit of a bump for Joel Eriksson Ek that way. But again, I'm not sure I can really ascribe a huge percentage of this offense to Joel Eriksson Ek. It does seem like he's a little bit more of a product of his surroundings than anything else. So maybe he can get back up to like a 60 point pace, but I'm not seeing a massive amount of upside beyond that at this point. Josh asks, opinion of John Tavares, hold, trade, or drop? Definitely not dropping John Tavares anytime soon unless I'm in like a 6-team league or something like that. But Tavares has gone cold the last little bit, just 1 assist in his last 5, averaging just over 16 minutes a night, so they really have cut back on his ice time. 308th in shots per 60, 109 in individual scoring chances, 4 per 60. On-ice numbers are a little better, 58th in Corsi, 4 per 60, 89th in scoring chances, 4 per 60. Yeah, on the season now pacing for 24 goals, 68 points. The underlying metrics have been really good for Tavares all season long until really this last stretch. Like on the season, he's pacing for, not pacing for, he is 21st in shots per 60, 5th in individual scoring chances, 4 per 60. On-ice numbers are really good. 17th in Corsi, 4 per 60, 9th in scoring chances, 4 per 60. It is a little bit hard to figure out exactly what's going wrong, but definitely the 8.2% shooting percentage shouldn't maintain for Tavares. This is a guy who can definitely sustain a higher shooting percentage than that. And the on-ice shooting percentage at 10.9% is probably a little light too. I think that there's a chance that people believe that, you know, he's just kind of riding off into the sunset here. I don't really think that's the case. Even the IPP is low for him and where he's been the last number of years. So I do think that there is a probable bounce back coming for Tavares. I don't know that it's going to be, you know, past a point per game Tavares. I think, yeah, maybe a touch below, like 75 to 80 points, I think, is where I'd put Tavares as a point pace rest of season, assuming that, you know, this last 5 games is just a tough stretch and not an indication of, you know, underlying injury or something that we don't know about. yeah, I'm fairly confident that we'll get a turnaround here from Tavares soon. It is a case though where, just considering the fact that they have cut back his minutes a little bit, I do want to see it a little bit before I go out and make a move to acquire Tavares right now. I want to see the minutes tick back up a little bit. I want to see him start to generate a bit more in shots, and yeah, just see the underlying numbers come back a little bit just to support the thesis that he can get back to a higher point pace and support a buy proposition there. Jackson asks, question for you. Keepers League for keeper as of now between Forsberg or Dobson. Goals, assists, points, power play, points, shots on goal, hits, blocks. Other keepers are McDavid, Jack Hughes, and Alexander Barkov. That is pretty tough. Forsberg and Dobson. I think I'm probably going to go with the defenseman there just because, you're keeping 3 forwards already, so it'd be nice to get a defenseman spot locked up in Dobson. Obviously, I think Dobson is kind of performing. He's overperforming. I'll put it that way. He's definitely overperforming. A player that I do want to talk about a little bit later on the season. What's the pace at these days? Yeah, 84-point pace on the season. I don't know that keeps up. He's got some pretty high metrics, but yeah, he's definitely playing very well, and while I would be surprised to see him pace for 84 points for the rest of this season, and to do that once again, like next season or something, I do think like 70 points, if he's going to continue to get these kind of minutes, I do think that 70 points is a reasonable expectation, kind of as a baseline year by year from this point onwards. So I do think that Dobson is probably the one that I would go with. Forsberg might be a little safer just because he provides hits, does that for you. Excuse me. Yeah, dry throat when you just talk and you don't have somebody else to turn the mic over to and mute yourself and get a quick drink. But we ride, as Blake would say. So yeah, Forsberg does provide you hits, so he does give you that aspect. If that's something that you really feel like you need in your 4 keepers, then you could look that way. I think Dobson just being at a different position, premium position in defense, I think that's the way that I would go. Jackson said, agreed. So I see this production again. Probably not, but he is on a good team, solid deployment. But even 70 points as a keeper, yeah, exactly. That's kind of where I'd be at. Is I think he can probably hit 70 points next season. That's probably where I'd put his point pace at for the rest of this season, somewhere in that range. So that level for a defenseman is obviously a terrific spot to be at. So I'd be plenty happy to have that as my 4th keeper. All right, let's get back to it. Rickard Rakell, 2 goals, 2 assists, 4 points in his last 5 here, averaging over 20 minutes a night, which is really nice to see. Anytime you can get that baseline of minutes played, you're going to enjoy that. He's on the top line with Crosby and Gensel. You're going to get points there. He did get bumped off the top power play in favor of Brian Rust in this game against the Kraken here today. So that's obviously not ideal, but yeah, I believe he got a couple assists in the game today, if I remember correctly. I'd have to go back and check out the box score again, but didn't seem to phase him all that much. Either way, Rakell 180th in shots per 60 over the last 5, but 34th in individual scoring chances 4 per 60, 15th in Corsi 4 per 60, 13th in scoring chances 4 per 60, and those numbers have been pretty consistent over the season. He's pacing for just 14 goals and 44 points, but he's been kind of on a bit of a tear since returning from his injury. And so I do think, like, if you look at his season-long stats, 47% IPP, 6.4% shooting percentage, 10.2% on-ice shooting percentage, all those numbers should come up. I think, like, you're probably looking at Rakell, if he's on line 1 without power play 1, he's probably, like, in a 50 to 55-point range. If he gets the power play 1, then you can probably bump him up to, like, somewhere in the 65-point range. So Rakell is one of those guys, he's useful, even if he's just on line 1, but if he does get power play 1, then he gets an extra boost, and he's very useful at that point, basically. Again, a guy who shoots and gets around the net and hits and does all those things for you, so he does provide in other ways even when he's not scoring, and so he just provides you with a little bit safer of a baseline in that way. Alex Tuck was also requested. 3 goals, 4 points in his last 5 now. Around 18.5 minutes a night through these 5 games. 35th in shots per 60, but down at 218th in individual scoring chances, 4 per 60. 124th in Corsi, 4 per 60. And 181st in scoring on ice scoring chances, 4 per 60. Was playing on the top line with Tage Thompson and Zach Benson, interestingly enough, in the game here today against the Sharks. Obviously going to be on that top power play as well. On the season now, Tuck is pacing for 27 goals, 67 points, 65% IPP, 12.6% shooting percentage, 10.7% on ice shooting percentage. That doesn't feel that far off for Tuck. Yeah, quite honestly, I'll check out and see what he did last year. Last year is starting to feel like it was a bit of an outlier across the board for some of these Buffalo players. I do think that Thompson is probably the exception to that rule, because I do think that Thompson is, by the metrics and by the eye test, whatever way you look, he's out of this world in terms of the skill. So yeah, Tuck, the way that I look at it, last year, easily the outlier in terms of his shooting percentage, up at 16.5%. This year, so far at 12.6%, much more in line with his previous seasons. But what's holding him down right now is just the 8.1 shots per 60 currently. In the 4 seasons prior, he'd averaged over 9 shots per 60. So getting that extra shot every 60 minutes definitely would lead to some more goals for him. The on-ice numbers, still really good. He's got a better Corsi 4 per 60 this year than last year. The scoring chances 4 per 60 have come down this year from last year. The on-ice shooting percentage has obviously come down this year from last year. Last year it was probably a little bit too high. This year it might be a little bit too low so far, so you might see a little bit of positive regression there. You might see a few more assists, but yeah, 25 to 30 goals, 70-point Alex Tuck. I feel like that's what we should be expecting. Gustav Nyquist next up. 2 goals, 5 points, his last 5 here. He's been hot for a little bit now. Really solid stuff. Seems to have really kind of entrenched himself top line, top power play there in Nashville, averaging over 19 minutes a night, 247th in shots per 60, 285th in individual scoring chances, 4 per 60, but the on-ice numbers are solid, 27th in Corsi, 4 per 60, 59th in scoring chances, 4 per 60. On the season now, pacing for 21 goals, 65 points, 67% IPP, 12.8% shooting percentage, 11.0% on-ice shooting percentage. The IPP might be a touch high at 67%. That might come down, but yeah, realistically, 20 goals, 60-point Gustav Nyquist should be the expectation, in my opinion, moving forward. I don't really see a reason why someone else is going to take that away from him, that role away from him at the moment. There always could be, if Nashville goes downhill and they decide they want to rotate through some younger guys just to see what they have. Maybe that happens. Maybe that takes down Nyquist a little bit. Maybe he gets traded to a contender and now all of a sudden he's just like a third-line winger on a contender. That could happen as well. So I'm not like super attached to Gustav Nyquist. I think you can drop him if he is at the bottom of your lineup and you're not going to miss it, If Nyquist isn't getting into any games for you this week and you could pick someone up who's going to get into like 4 games for you, then that's probably worth it just for the 1 week, because guys like Nyquist, while they're nice, are usually eminently replaceable. So I'm not going to get attached at this point. But he has been a very useful player for fantasy purposes so far and probably will continue to be so. Antonio asks, TJ Oshie sneaking his way back to a pickup or too soon to tell? Yeah, I mean, he had a really great game yesterday. I tweeted about it. Really strong underlying stats. It is just 1 game, though. Oshie does do this from time to time where he pops up with monster games and then just falls off again, goes deathly cold for, 5, 10, 15 games. So I'm not like in love with Oshie, but if Washington is happening to have a good schedule this week, that 1 game would definitely make me take notice and consider streaming him for the week. So yeah, that's where I'm at. He's still a streamer level. I'd like to see a little bit more consistency before I'm thinking about it, though. All right. I had a question about Ville Husso versus Samuel Ersson. Basically just asking, what to do between the two. I'm going to try to find the exact wording back right here so that I can get this right. Is Huso a drop when he returns and Urson a hold? So first off, this is the House of Zero G. No goalie is continually a hold, but Urson, I mean, he's a guy you can hold at the moment. He's playing terrific. Splitting starts basically with Carter Hart at the moment. Philadelphia's playing well. I think you probably don't have a strong reason to drop Urson unless, it's a week where Urson isn't getting 2 starts. That might actually be this week where he doesn't get 2 starts this week, and maybe that means there is somebody else out there who you'd rather have. But yeah, he's as good a bet as anybody in the league right now to have a solid start every time he's out there. So he's playing just as well as you could possibly expect. And then Huso, like, Lyon has played really well this year. Huso has not played well at any point in really since he's gotten to Detroit. So I'm not convinced that Lyon doesn't just take this thing over for the rest of the season, even when Huso comes back. So yeah, I had Ville Husso and I dropped him earlier in the season, and I don't feel any type of way about keeping Husso just because he's the perceived starter or was to start this season. I think Detroit's just going to go with whoever's hot, and I think Lyon might actually outplay Husso the rest of the season. So I would not feel bad about dropping Husso, and I would much rather have Urson at this moment. All right, Josh is in the chat. New to fantasy hockey in first place. Good stuff. 2 questions. Number 1, when do you start thinking about second half / playoffs? We'll start there. So basically, this is what I say about playoffs and about, optimizing your playoff schedule. The number one thing you can do, obviously, to win the championship, you have to make the playoffs. So that has to be your first focus. If you're comfortable in the playoffs at this point, like if you're 14-0 at this point in your season, you're just absolutely cruising, you're on your way, then I want to make sure that I'm locking up the bye. That is the next best way to assure yourself of a championship. Just take away, if your league has a bye where the top seed or the top 2 seeds don't have to play the first round of the playoffs and the other teams all have to play, then that's a massive, massive advantage. You can use your ads early to set yourself up for the upcoming week, really set yourself up just terrifically well for that kind of second round of the playoffs matchup. And only having to beat 2 other teams instead of 3 other teams is just a massive, massive advantage on your way to a championship. So the best thing you can do for yourself in the playoffs is to get a bye. So that should be your primary focus. Now, if there are opportunities along the way to acquire players who are going to be rest of season holds, so usually this is going to be done by trade. Usually you're not going to find these guys on the waiver wire who just appear out of nowhere and magically have terrific playoff schedules. But if you can find a trade somewhere where you find someone who has a terrific playoff schedule for you, then yeah, it's worth exploring, because at this point, if you are in first place, if you are comfortably in a bye position at this point, it's worth exploring, worth finding a player that does have that good playoff schedule, because you can set yourself up, obviously, in a better way. We're talking about percentage points here, right? We're not talking about, if I go acquire that superstar who has the perfect playoff schedule for me, realistically, that's probably only improving your chances of a championship by, like, I don't know, 5%, something like that. But 5% is 5%. We want to get the bye, get that 5%. We want to get this player on our team, get that 5%. Any incremental gain we can make along the way, we want to be doing for sure. So, yeah, I think it's probably still a little early for the vast majority of people who aren't just like absolutely cruising, have the most points for by, like, I don't know, 20% more than anybody else in their league. Maybe that's the case for some people. At this point, I still think it's a little bit early to be optimizing for playoff schedules. Injuries can still happen. A lot can happen between now and the playoffs, but it's definitely something to have in the back of your mind. And if the opportunity does arise where, maybe there's someone who's an obvious buy low just by the metrics and they happen to have a terrific playoff schedule, then yeah, this is a time where maybe you should be buying them now, because maybe they turn their game around before you get to the point where you're starting to think about playoff schedules. Maybe you just want to be on that player right now, be in on that buy low now, and then you kind of reap both rewards, where you're getting the buy low, but you're also getting that in time for your fantasy playoffs. Second question, should I start looking to add more center slash right wing or left wing slash right wing versus one position players? In general, any positional flexibility you can add to your lineup is definitely worth doing. Um, I mean, you definitely shouldn't like go so far out of your way as to like make your lineup actively worse. But as a tiebreak or anything between two similar players, definitely you should be looking at more positional eligibility as a good thing on your roster. And lastly, how many D and goalies do you recommend? Points league and 4D and 2 goalies a day in the starting roster. Yeah. This varies for me. So depending on a myriad of factors, I roster anywhere from 3 to 5D in most points leagues at any given time. You know, typically forwards are scoring more points in most points leagues, and so if you can roster more forwards, it probably benefits you to do so. So getting down to 3 defensemen, if you can roster a lot of forwards that week and you can still not end up with anybody on your bench all week, if that's something that you can do, then terrific. Now you've kind of gamed the system to where you don't have to roster that many D, but you're not being penalized by having to bench forwards. So if you can do that and you can get down to like 3D in one week, that might be a good thing. In other weeks, it might be the opposite. You have so many forwards that are all playing on the same nights, and so you have to roster 5D for that week because that's the only way you're going to get games played basically into your lineup. So I would say usually between 3 and 5D in a 4D setup. And then for goalies, again, depending on point systems, really can vary. I've gone 0 goalies, I've gone 1 goalie, I've gone 2 goalies. Typically, 2 goalies, I guess, would be my most common spot, but 3 goalies as well in some leagues that have solid goalie weights. Picking up goalies who are going to get a couple starts that week, especially if it's a forgiving points league where they really just have to face a bunch of shots and they're going to have a good point total even if they give up like 4 goals. Yeah, in leagues like that, there's probably no reason not to roster 3 goalies for a week. So really depends. Really depends on what you got going on in your specific league. All right. I want to dig into now this question that I got. Yeah, I think it was. I want to give the correct credit here. Skateful Dead asks, it'd be cool to hear one or two of your own puzzling player choices. So I do have a couple from this season. I also think about these players a little bit differently. So I'll start off. The 2 players that I was thinking about were JT Miller and Noah Dobson. And these are the types of players that I typically struggle with because they are overproducing by the metrics, and they have been overproducing all season long, basically. We're getting to a point now, we're a good chunk of the way into the season. They're still overproducing past the halfway point here. And they're still doing the thing, even though, like Miller's at a 21.3% shooting percentage, 17.4% on ice shooting percentage, just bananas, overperforming luck metrics for a guy like JT Miller. Noah Dobson at 54% IPP, like that's a Cale Makar level IPP. I don't really know if Dobson is that caliber. 13.3% on ice shooting percentage, again, like a Cale Makar type number. I don't know if Dobson is that kind of player necessarily. He's great, don't get me wrong, but is he really has he really just taken a step to where now we should consider him an absolute elite player for the rest of time, basically? So these are the types of players that I struggle with. So, I think of that season that Matt Duchene had a few years ago in Nashville, where he just went off, and he went off for the whole season. You think about that one William Karlsson season where he scored 43 goals and never came close ever again. Just had an insane shooting percentage. You think about Andrei Kuzmenko last year with the 27% shooting percentage, and this year he's like getting scratched multiple games in a row. So this is where I tend to struggle. So I do obviously still believe that there will be some regression here, but I'm struggling on how much to factor in, just the overall team situation. This is actually a legitimate absolutely terrific situation for both of these players. It's not necessarily reflected by the numbers because of the efficiency of the players that are around them, like Pettersson on the power play being around Miller, now playing with Pettersson at even strength currently. That's going to obviously boost Miller again. And Brock Besser obviously taking a huge step this year. That's been terrific for Miller as well. For Dobson, it's been Barzal who's taken the big step. Horvat being there has really raised the scoring capabilities. So yeah, these are two types of players, I would say, that I struggle with how much to expect to regress them. I know what, just going by the numbers and going by the same kind of law of averages that I apply to every player, I know what I would typically project a player like this for. But I always do struggle with how much to, regress them when the situation is legitimately very good. Yeah, it feels like a bit of a coin flip, and I hate that. I want the numbers to be black and white. I want them to tell me exactly what to do, and it does feel like a bit of a coin flip to me. So that's a kind of I guess a type of player, a profile of player that is pretty puzzling to me. What do I do with this? I have JT Miller in the Fantasy Puck Content Creators League. I've been riding him all season. I threw out some offers previously, tried to get Matthew Tkachuk. Wasn't able to do that. And yeah, I'm at this point, I'm like, I don't know. Maybe I'm just hanging on to JT Miller for the rest of the season. It's probably not going to be this good all season long, but I don't know. The wave hasn't broken yet, so how long is it going to take before it does? Even if he gets me to, the 60 game mark before the wave finally breaks and he starts to come back down to earth, how bad is that coming back down to earth? It might still be an 80-point pace, and that's probably good enough if the rest of my team is good enough, where I don't need to be like freaking out over that for the rest of the season. So interesting question. Just two other profiles of players that I do find typically puzzling. So Owen Tippett, Sam Bennett, these are your typical, high individual scoring chance for generators. But they always seem to end up in this range, like neither of them are pacing for 50 points on the season. They're typically getting low average time on ice, and I'm always sitting here, but just, if they do get that extra 2 minutes, 3 minutes average time on ice, then they're going to be incredible. But, they very well may never get there. So what do we do with that? I tend to, I think, slightly overvalue players like this. I tend to project them a little bit higher than I probably should. So that is definitely a profile player that I struggle with. And then the flip side of that coin are players like Nick Suzuki and Casey Middlestat. They are typically low goal scoring players. They don't have good shot numbers, they don't have good individual scoring chance for numbers. Even the on ice numbers are typically not that good. And so I'm always kind of waiting for the other shoe to drop and for them to the bottom to just completely fall out. And I do think that these types of players are more volatile, where they'll have Casey Middlestat had a 3-point game today. But before that, he had taken one shot in 3 straight games and done nothing. So they are volatile in that sense. But you look up at the end of the season, they're probably pacing for 20 to 25 goals and around 70 points. So these are types of players that I do really struggle with valuing correctly, I guess I would say. All jokes aside about Casey Middlestat, I do think that obviously he's playing at a good level. I don't think he's going to sustain this, but I mean, he's sustained it so far, so hard to take that away from him. Overall, these are the types of players, the profiles of players, I guess, that I find the most puzzling. It was a fun little diversion there for sure. All right, I believe we made it to the end of everything here. So that's going to be all we've got for this episode. Hopefully it brought you some value. I hope you get a little bit better at fantasy hockey today. All the advanced stats you heard today came from Natural Stat Trick, which is a terrific free resource. Many thanks to the band there for supplying music for this podcast. Be sure to check out their Spotify as well. That's it, folks. Much love.